places like Yale and Oxford and Harvard, you speak with people of high intellect, and I'm sure you've encountered the worldview of nihilism that says that there is no inherent value to life. And my question for you is, how do you argue against that worldview?
Actually, it's not as difficult to argue with it as they make it out to be. Nihilism, basically nihilo, meaning nothing, that life is ultimately worth nothing. And the German philosopher lived 1844 to 1900, Friedrich Nietzsche. He was sort of the quintessential nihilistic philosopher. And if you go back to Solomon, when he was talking about it's all a chasing after the wind, everything is nothing, there's the ideas of nihilism coming there, but people forget that Solomon's qualifier is that phrase, under the sun, meaning if you lock God out, everything is a chasing after the wind, everything is nothing. But God is not to be locked out. God is very much in the paradigm. The way you deal with nihilism is one of the things nihilism harnesses. You'll have to listen very carefully here now. Nihilism harnesses the idea of nothingness, the idea of meaninglessness, the idea of emptiness, is because they do not see an all-powerful, all-loving God. So they link nihilism into their theistic framework that you can't have an all-loving and an all-powerful God, or look at this universe this way, therefore it all amounts to nothing. But when they say that therefore there's no all-powerful God because of all the suffering and evil that they see, they make an assumption of evil, which must assume good. When they assume there's good, they must assume a moral law, which they like to deny. But when they assume they must assume a moral law in order to talk about evil. So they go from evil to assuming good. Assuming good must assume a moral law. But if you assume a moral law, they must posit a moral lawgiver. But that's whom they're trying to disprove and not prove. If there's no moral lawgiver, there's no moral law. If there's no moral law, there's no good. If there's no good, there's no evil. The question disintegrates. But they want to tell you there is evil. But they don't want to climb up the ladder to personalization in a personal God. So I've had students who go one step with me to say, okay, there has to be a good. They'll also say, all right, maybe there has to be a moral law by which we differentiate good and bad, but they don't know how to get to the next step, which is to be a moral law, that there must be a moral lawgiver. And my answer to them is straightforward. Every time you raise the question of evil, it is either raised by a person or about a person, which means the person considers the question valid. And the question is only valid if persons have intrinsic worth. If persons don't have intrinsic worth, the question is invalid. So they consider the problem of evil a valid question, but they deduce nihilism as therefore the resultant philosophy. But in their assumption of evil, they assume intrinsic worth, therefore nihilism cannot be true.